Two retired South Africans, aged 71 and 73, drove into Kruger National Park for a quiet holiday. They were intercepted, had their hands tied behind their backs, were repeatedly stabbed, and their bodies were thrown into a crocodile-infested river at a location that criminals have used to escape across international borders for over a century. And as you watch this video right now, nobody has been arrested. The suspect's vehicle tracks lead into Mozambique, and the South African government's response? Condolences. Stay with me, because what is happening in this country goes so much deeper than one tragic murder, and most people have absolutely no idea. On Sunday, the 17th of May 2026, Ernst Murray, 71, and his wife Dina Murray, 73, residents of the Fynbos Heights retirement village in Mossel Bay, checked into Kruger National Park for what was meant to be a peaceful getaway. They were regular visitors. Their family described them as people who respected the park's rules and never placed themselves at unnecessary risk. They were last seen alive on Wednesday morning, the 20th of May, at the Pafuri picnic site in the far northern section of the park. When they failed to return to their camp that evening, a search operation was launched. Their bodies were discovered on Friday, the 22nd of May, floating in the Levubu River at Crooks's Corner, the precise point where the borders of South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique converge. Both had been bound at the wrists and subjected to repeated stab wounds to the upper body. Their green Ford Ranger double cab was gone, and security camera footage from all 9 of Kruger's access gates and 2 official Mozambican border posts confirmed it had not left through any official exit. Rangers then found tire tracks near the crime scene leading through the bush, through a break in the fence, and into Mozambique. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was an execution. And this was the first incident of its kind in Kruger National Park's entire 100-year history. The location where those bodies were dumped is not incidental. It is deeply, historically deliberate. Crooks's Corner earned its name in the early 20th century because it was the most famous fugitive crossing point in all of southern Africa. Poachers, ivory smugglers, and criminals running from the law would simply wade across the Limpopo or the Levubu, step into another country, and vanish beyond the reach of any single jurisdiction. That tradition has never died. It has only been modernized. The poaching syndicates that operate in Kruger's northern sections today are not small-time opportunists. They are sophisticated, cross-border criminal networks trafficking in rhino horn, one of the most lucrative black market commodities on earth, ivory, and increasingly stolen vehicles. The fact that Ernst and Dina Murray's Ford Ranger was driven through the bush, over a fence, and apparently into Mozambique within hours of their murders tells you everything you need to know about how these networks operate. They had a plan. They had an exit. They were not afraid. Kruger National Park covers more than 2 million hectares, an area roughly the size of Wales, UK. It shares a 374-kilometer border with Mozambique and Zimbabwe, much of it remote, porous, and chronically under-monitored. In 2025, a private security initiative operating near the notorious Numbi Gate, itself the subject of US Embassy travel warnings after a German tourist was killed there in 2022, reported 9 consecutive months of 0 criminal incidents against tourists, achieved at a cost of 300,000 rands per month. When that funding ran out, the patrols stopped. The program, described as directly responsible for protecting tourists' lives, was placed on hold because the money could not be secured. Think about that. South Africa's most iconic national park, generating billions in tourism revenue, was relying on a private security program funded at 300,000 rands a month to keep tourists alive near one gate. When the money ran out, the safety stopped. And now, in the northern Sanatseni section, 2 people are dead. SANParks has responded to the Murray murders by deploying additional rangers and monitoring equipment. The minister has expressed condolences. The police have opened cases of murder and hijacking. And the suspects, in all likelihood, are already beyond reach in Mozambique. Now we arrive at the conversation that makes politicians nervous, and that the mainstream media consistently refuses to hold with any intellectual honesty. Because Ernst and Dina Murray are not an isolated case. They are the latest names in a pattern that has been building in South Africa for decades, a pattern that involves elderly, rural, and vulnerable white South Africans being subjected to extreme, methodical, premeditated violence, followed by a state response characterized by inadequate investigation, almost non-existent prosecution, and an official narrative that dismisses any suggestion of targeting as politically motivated hysteria. Let us deal with the facts. According to data compiled by the Transvaal Agricultural Union of South Africa, TAU, since 1990 there have been just under 2,300 farm murders in this country. Of those, 1,363 victims were white farmers, with a further 529 being white direct family members or spouses, meaning the overwhelming majority of farm murder victims since democracy have been white. In 2024 alone, there were 32 farm murders recorded by the TAU, down from 50% in 2023. AFRI to Forum's 2025 data shows 184 farm attacks and 29% farm murders in that year, with 36% of all those attacks classified as serious violent acts with a substantial risk of death. These are not statistics, these are people. And the manner of these attacks is the detail that the statistics alone cannot capture. In June 2023, Henny and Anneke Potgieter were attacked on their farm near Origstad in Limpopo. Anneke was burned alive. Henny was beaten to death with blunt force trauma before his lower body was set alight. A South African judge, when this case came before him, compared the prosecution's classification of it as a farm attack to a scene from Animal Farm, suggesting that treating it as a distinct category of crime meant some lives were being treated as more important than others. AFRI Forum called that judicial attitude, correctly, extremely dangerous. Here is the number that should stop every South African in their tracks. According to AFRI Forum's Rural Injustice Report, examining data from 2019 to 2022, out of 1,402 recorded farm attack and farm murder incidents, only 66 cases resulted in a conviction. That is a prosecution success rate of less than 5%. More than 95% of all farm murders in South Africa go unsolved. Not only that, 0 successful prosecutions for farm murders were secured in Gauteng, Mpumalanga, the Northwest, or the Northern Cape during that entire 4-year investigation period. 0. In the second quarter of 2023, AFRI Forum found that murders on farms surged by 167% quarter-on-quarter, from 9 in the first quarter to 24 in the second. And in that same quarter, out of 76 recorded farm attacks, only 15 saw suspects arrested. That is a 20% arrest rate on violent crimes being committed in broad daylight, against people in their homes and on their land. The U.S. State Department's own Bureau for Democracy, Human Rights and Labor investigated this independently and concluded that farm attacks in South Africa are not ordinary crimes. Their report confirmed that victims are disproportionately older and isolated, and that police response is consistently either slow or completely absent. The South African government has a carefully constructed answer to all of this, and it is worth examining precisely because of how it is built. The government points out correctly that South Africa recorded approximately 27,494 murders in the 2023-2024 financial year. That is 76 people killed every single day, making South Africa one of the deadliest countries on earth that is not technically at war. The government then correctly notes that the overwhelming majority of murder victims in South Africa are black, and that farm murders represent approximately 0.2% of all murders. Case closed, they say. No targeting, no pattern, just crime. But there are 2 things the government does not tell you. First, South Africa officially does not disaggregate murder statistics by race. That is a political choice, not a logistical one. When you choose not to measure something, you cannot be held accountable for it. Second, the relevant metric is not absolute numbers. It is per capita rate. White South Africans make up approximately 7% of the population. When you calculate farm murders as a per capita rate within the farming community, a community that is disproportionately white, elderly, and rural, the numbers are deeply alarming. The Institute for Security Studies has confirmed that the farm murder rate is significantly elevated compared to the national average, even as it tracks broader crime trends. What the government is doing is using a true statistic. Black South Africans are the majority of murder victims, to obscure a different, also true, but politically inconvenient statistic. That white, rural South Africans are dying at disproportionate rates, in disproportionately brutal ways, with a disproportionately low chance of their killers ever facing justice. You cannot discuss what is happening to South Africa's white minority without discussing the political climate in which it occurs. This is not about assigning blame for every crime to a political party. It is about understanding how ideological environments create what analysts call permission structures. The cultural and political signals that tell certain actors that certain targets are acceptable, that certain acts carry reduced moral or social risk. For years, South African political discourse has been saturated with the expropriation without compensation debate, with land seizure rhetoric, with the singing of songs calling for the killing of the Boer at political rallies, including at ANC-affiliated events. The Constitutional Court has been asked to adjudicate on whether that song constitutes hate speech. That debate alone tells you something about the environment in which white farmers in South Africa go to sleep every night. This is not a centrally coordinated campaign. There is no evidence of a government-directed extermination program. But what there is, and what is far more dangerous precisely because it is harder to prosecute or expose, is a decentralized ideological permission structure in which attacking white farm owners or rural whites carries diminished social and cultural consequences, enabled by decades of land grievance rhetoric from the top of South African political society, and protected by a justice system that has systematically failed to hold perpetrators accountable. This issue has now gone fully global. Earlier in 2025, US President Donald Trump signed an executive order offering refugee status to white Afrikaners from South Africa, citing what he called a genocide. The ANC government responded with fury, calling the move political interference and insisting that there is no targeting of white South Africans. The South African police minister stood before the media and announced that the 2 farm owners killed in the fourth quarter of 2024 were African, not white, as if the ethnicity of those specific victims settled the question of whether a broader pattern exists. Meanwhile, New Zealand's safe travel guidance has issued specific warnings about Kruger National Park's Numbi Gate. The US Embassy had already issued targeted security alerts for the same entry point after the 2022 murder of a German tourist there. When foreign governments begin naming specific gates of a specific game reserve in specific travel advisories, that is not routine diplomatic caution. That is intelligence-based. Specific knowledge of threat patterns that the South African government has either failed or refused to address. Genocide Watch has previously placed South Africa on its monitoring list. The legal definition of genocide under international law requires the intent to destroy a group in whole or in part, a standard that is difficult to prove in the South African context, and one that AfriForum itself has been careful not to apply formally. But Genocide Watch does not wait for mass extermination before it sounds the alarm. It watches for preconditions: the dehumanization of a group in political language, the systematic failure of the state to protect them, the normalization of extreme violence against them. South Africa ticks those boxes. Whether that constitutes genocide in law is a debate for courts. Whether it constitutes a crisis deserving urgent national attention is not a debate at all. Ernst and Dina Maré were not young adventurers pushing boundaries in a dangerous environment. They were a 71 and 73-year-old retired couple from a garden route retirement village, doing what they had apparently done many times before, visiting a national park that South Africa promotes to the world as a flagship tourism destination. They followed the rules. They respected the park. And they were bound, stabbed, and fed to crocodiles by people who had no fear of consequence, in a location chosen specifically because it provides a guaranteed escape route across an international border. This happened in Kruger National Park's 100-year history for the very first time. And the fact that it is the first time should not be a reassurance. It should be a warning about how far the erosion of security, the emboldening of criminal networks, and the collapse of law enforcement in South Africa's rural and wilderness areas has progressed. The killers drove a stolen vehicle through the bush, through a fence, and into Mozambique. They are most likely beyond the reach of South African law right now. The justice system that failed to convict in 95% of farm murder cases over 4 years will now be asked to conduct a cross-border investigation in one of the most remote and under-resourced frontier zones on the continent. The minister has expressed condolences. The mayor has called for government to do more than expected. And Ernst and Dina Marais will join the list of names that briefly shook South Africa before being absorbed back into the numbing statistical noise of a country that buries 76 of its citizens every single day. If a comparable number of any other demographic group in South Africa were being killed in their homes, on their land, and in their leisure spaces, bound, tortured, mutilated, and discarded, at the rates documented for white, rural, and farming communities, with a 95% impunity rate for their killers, with statistics deliberately not disaggregated by race, and with a justice system that secured 0 convictions across 4 entire provinces over 4 years, would the national and international response be the same? That question is not rhetorical. It is the most important political question in South Africa right now. And the silence that greets it from the institutions that should answer it tells you more than any statistic ever could. Ernst and Dina Marais deserve to grow old in peace. They deserve to drive through Kruger, watch the elephants at sunset, and go home to their retirement village. They deserve to be more than a statistic, more than a news cycle, more than a 2-minute condolence statement from a minister who will face no accountability for the collapse of the system that failed them. What is happening in South Africa is not simply crime. It is the product of a deliberate political environment, a systematically defunded and captured security apparatus, and an international narrative battle in which the lives of certain South Africans are being erased from the story. The question is whether all South Africans, have the courage to demand the full truth, regardless of how uncomfortable it is. Because the alternative is more names, more condolences, more tire tracks leading across the border into the dark. If this video made you think, if it gave you information you did not have before, then please share it. Because the people who need to hear this conversation are not going to find it on the evening news. Hit the like button, subscribe to PowerShift SA if you are not already, and turn on your notifications so you do not miss what is coming next. The story of South Africa is still being written. Make sure you are paying attention.